this hour with Michael Shear of the New York Times, next hour with Peter Baker of the New York Times, two of the finest reporters in America. I stress reporters. And you can read their web writings. You can follow them on Twitter. You'll have no idea who they vote for. You'll have no idea what they think because they're actually reporters. Good morning, Michael. Good to have you back.
Well, congratulations on the anniversary of the show, and thank you for those kind words. Appreciate
Well, now I'm going to put you on the hot spot, Michael, because that was a trap. I want to start. It takes a little bit of a setup, so bear with me. This is the Wall Street Journal yesterday on the president's Mount Rushmore speech. At Mount Rushmore, Trump uses 4th of July celebration to stoke a culture war, Los Angeles Times. Then a quote from your paper. Trump uses Mount Rushmore speech to deliver divisive culture war message. Then from the Associated Press, Trump pushes racial division, flouts virus rules at Mount Rushmore. And from the Washington Post, at Mount Rushmore, Trump exploits social divisions, warns of left-wing cultural revolution in dark speech ahead of Independence Day. The editorial begins, President Trump delivered one of the best speeches of his presidency Friday evening at Mount Rushmore. I said what the Journal said on Al Sharpton's show on Sunday. I thought it was one of the best 5 speeches he's given, along with Saudi Arabia, Poland, Normandy, and his most recent State of the Union. I was overjoyed with it. I played the whole thing on the show yesterday. And at the conclusion of 2 days of commentary on Mount Rushmore, Britt Hume said this to Bret Baier on Monday.
Well, the first thing is, Brett, President Trump never mentioned any dead Confederates. His speech, in its bulk, was a ringing, a full-throated defense of America's history and heroes, and there were no Confederates mentioned. It was all the forefathers of our country, Washington, Lincoln, and other great Americans, and that was really the main bulk of it. So what she said is flat out false. And those headlines you mentioned from those newspapers were unbelievably misleading. And some of the other headlines that I saw were even worse than those. In fact, as I followed this over the weekend, I don't think I've ever seen such dishonest and biased coverage of any event. This was a speech meant to be inspiring, and even if you think the messenger was flawed, the speech itself was quite strong and in some ways very positive.
And so, Michael Shear, I conclude with Holman Jenkins this morning. He has a column on the Press and this incredible coverage of Mount Rushmore speech. Here we are. America faces the virus, the protests, and new and dangerous tensions with China in the most tumultuous election in recent memory. And it does so without thought leadership worth the name, with only intellectual and emotional chaos from some of our once credible news organizations. What do you make of this as a reporter I esteem, and I think my audience esteems, of what is a complete collapse in the reporting aspect of the Mount Rushmore speech?
So look, I mean, I think that my thoughts are, I think I have 2 thoughts on this. One is, one is that context matters when you deliver a speech. And I think that you would probably agree that the words that a president or frankly anybody speaks in a speech, can be interpreted differently depending on the context in which that speech is given, the events that are happening around that time. And so, the fact that the president, for example, didn't address what is one of the sort of, predominant things happening at the moment, which is this racial unrest and demands for social justice. In one sense, is notable in and of itself, and so that it strikes a different tone because of what's happening at the moment. And then the second thing I would say is that it underscores just the completely polarized nation that we live in, that people see things through their own lenses, and liberal America hears that speech and hears one thing, conservative America hears that speech and hears a completely different thing. And I think the challenge for journalism, getting back finally to your question, I do think that it is incumbent upon journalists to try not to fall into that polarized trap and to report, not through a particular set of lenses, left or right, but to report on what the president said and to give it some context without lurching into opinion. Did some of the headlines, did some of the reporting go too far and miss that mark? I suspect maybe it did. We're, I think, all in journalism struggling to get that right every day.
Michael, I understand that, and I don't want to put you in a position of criticizing either your colleagues at the paper or at any other paper. But I do believe there is something of note, because I read the speech, I didn't see it, and I think historians will read the speech and they will see a seminal moment when the president declares that the radical view of American history is a web of lies. That is a seminal moment. I think it will become known as the web of lies speech. And I believe it will be, if there is a turning point for the Trump campaign, if he rebounds from being behind, it will be because of that speech. Patriotic, aimed at the center of America, the pride of America. It does not address racial tensions directly. It addresses violence in the streets. But when it comes to the media, I don't think context is what the people expect from news reporters. I think they expect, what did he say and to whom did he say it? Where did he say it? And what did he say? And so the classic reporting is gone, and not just from one account, in which case it would just be a one-off, but from every major newspaper and all of the cable networks except Fox and the Wall Street Journal. And it tells me, as I made an argument in the opinion section of the Washington Post 3 weeks ago, the media has got to heal itself because it's broken into a polarized set of pro and con Trump pieces.
Well, I don't disagree with you that there are problems in the media. So I'm not a kind of defense at all costs. We struggle every day. We make mistakes every day, and I think that there are some examples of the media getting caught up in what I would consider not traditional news reporting and opinion and sort of lurching into opinion. I agree with that. But I don't think that you really want context-free journalism. I know you're a very sophisticated person, and if the media were covering a Democratic president right now, you would not be arguing for a media that simply becomes a mouthpiece for the Democratic administration. You would be a person who was arguing that the media should take what the Democratic president says and make sure that it is fact-checked, make sure that it is put into the context of what of the moment and of what's really going on. And I think that you can look at that Mount Rushmore speech and call it patriotic, but it was also dark. I think that's undeniable too. That the two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. And I think I think again the backdrop of the moment of what's going on in the country right now, what President Trump was saying, the actual words that he said had a resonance that I think journalists are duty bound to capture.
When the Associated Press says Trump pushes racial division, flouts virus rules at Mount Rushmore, and the Post, my friend Robert Costa, and he's a friend on every week, at Mount Rushmore, Trump exploits social divisions, warns of left-wing cultural revolution in dark speech ahead of Independence Day. That is not intended to suggest context. That's a condemnation of the speech. And I'll ask Robert about it when he comes on next with me. Yeah. I want to give the last minute to you. Are editors struggling with this? Do they even have any over-their-shoulder concern? Oh, we blew that, in your view, Michael Shear.
I partly because of working from home and not being in the newsroom as much. I don't actually know whether our editors in particular were struggling with that particular speech story or whether they have any regrets about it. I get your point. I do think I do think sometimes the language can veer into going too much into being condemnation. But I also think that the speech did for purposes of his campaign, especially exploit some of these divisions in the country.
All right, Michael Shear, I'll give you the last word. It is always a pleasure. Have a wonderful weekend ahead of you. Thank you for joining me as usual. One of the best in the business, America, and I'll be right back. Your phone calls are welcome at 1-800-520-1234. That will